Frozen Music is a video series from ABB presenting unique building projects and the architects behind them to a global community. Follow us around the world.
Good day, everyone. I'm Marcia Zad, and it is my pleasure to present the Shahgholi Villa on behalf of FMZD Design. Before we begin, I'd like to explain that this project aims to present a spatial solution to organizational paradigms in a Persian garden. To better understand the project premise, I'll begin by introducing the cultural context of people from Tehran. In Iran, people who originate from Tehran are known as Tehruni, and they present a certain prestige similar to that of New York socialites. Part of that social code relates to owning a high-rise apartment in the city, but escaping to the countryside for weekends and holidays. More recently, Tehran's traffic jams and air pollution are creating a greater incentive for escape. The proximity of outdoor entertainment around Tehran also makes this easy to happen. Tehran's growth has accommodated this lifestyle, or maybe this lifestyle has dictated the growth of Tehran. In any case, this paradigm has only added to urban sprawl without elevating the design impact. The city of Tehran is bound on one side by mountains and on the other by desert. Two different architectural cultures meet within these borders. And the city is exposed to different climates. We have mountains to the north, deserts to the south, green gardens to the east and west of the city, and the Caspian seaside is now only a 2-hour drive away. There's a natural experience for every ecosystem, and with it, an architectural typology and culture responding to it, different answers to different contexts, all in the proximity of the city. But as Tehranis continue to move to the countryside, instead of honoring the context, they're just exporting the same techniques, lifestyle, and architecture from their homes in the capital. Typically, the people of Tehran leave the dense and colorless urban environment to change their background and connect with nature and themselves. But what is happening, unfortunately, is that they just recreate the city in a new setting. I'm now pleased to introduce you to Milad, the project. We think that whoever works with us is cool. He loves new experiences. Based on his tastes, we offered to curate an experience for him that is very different from his lifestyle in Tehran. You can see his site plot here. It's a 2,000 square meter piece of land to the east of Tehran. If you remember, I said that the east of Tehran is full of gardenscapes and green fields. In Iran, when a border is defined in the countryside, the property is called a garden. We have this technique across different geographies. The garden has an owner, and what defines the garden is its border, the walls. The limits define the space which grows within it. One garden typology is found in the desert, and it is believed to pull paradise into the boundaries of the garden like an oasis flourishing in the desert. This particular typology is what you often see in Persian art. You can see the inspiration in the dimensions, motifs, and boundaries of paintings and carpets, reflecting heaven in the bordered limits of a garden. Another typology is found in green environments. In this case, the boundaries are defined by existing spatial fields. This typology is the approach that we adopted for this project. In this system, gardens are defined by trees as architectural elements within the field, and the walls are a limit of that field. However, while the wall presents a border of that field from the inside, from the outside, it is a wayfinding element that interweaves with the trees. This archetype is so intrinsic to Persian culture that it has its own literary title, the Kuche Bagh, or Garden Alley. We wanted to give the client a lifestyle which responds to nature, which was something that he also expected of us. And for this, we had to follow the context. We knew that we needed to adopt the vernacular behavior. We identified the basic patterning system of the site to be something like this: a pattern of garden borders which we must study, understand, and respect. But in line with what I noted earlier, what we actually observed is that the surrounding development goes against the context, behavior, and character, which denies identity and ignores placemaking. To distance our project from that, we decided that we need to work with the wall of the property as an architectural element. We need to redefine this element and expand its function, introducing habitability. To do this, we assume the wall not just as a border, but as a thickness, a poché. Traditionally, the thickness of the poché is habitable in Iranian architecture. Architectural elements which present a solution for redefining the wall and making the thickness habitable can be found everywhere in Iranian architecture. We can also observe these techniques at an urban scale as well. But let me bring us back to the garden motif. In this project, instead of seeing the border and the building as separate elements, we envision them as a unified spatial composition where the wall and the building are one and the same. We started by defining functional zones based on the client's interests and lifestyle, and then after that, we merged the functions with the wall thickness. This created an integrated spatial organization system that is both dynamic and interactive, we hope. Another important aspect of the design is the project ambience, and it's defined by two elements, the first which I'm going to talk about is geometry. In Iranian architecture, geometry signifies context. If you see sharp lines and complex ornamentation somewhere, that means it belongs to the city, whereas soft vernacular lines gesture towards rural environments. We were inspired by this naive and organic framework, which later became the formal language of the project, defining spaces and guiding design. The geometry system is fluid and adaptable, allowing for visual connections and vibrant spaces. The second element which creates the project ambience is materiality. Adobe is a standard material used in Persian vernacular architecture. The material provides an architectural connection to nature in the rural settings. In the Shahgholi villa, the organic geometric framework paired with the vernacular Adobe material creates a design that is readable from within itself, continuously presenting to and being discovered by its spatial relationships. I'll talk a little bit about form generation. The generative process starts with the site borders and a sunken courtyard to allow for privacy at different heights. The walls are expanded towards the center, and the layers are shuffled against each other, creating overhangs and terraces. Throughout, we kept the existing trees and preserved them, which would give life to the spaces. Another important thing to keep in mind is that from the alley, the wall is at a standard height typical of traditional garden alleys, which I talked about before. But from inside, the project stretches and expands to provide dynamic experiences. An overview of the program includes the living spaces above, and the lower levels house the support spaces and MEP. The sunken courtyard level includes the client's private rooms, the guest rooms, the kitchen, the sitting room, and the den. And the more general living spaces for fun and gathering are on this level. In this project, the facade is not a separate element, but rather is defined by depth and habitability. It is tangible from every angle and accessible from every corner. The highlighted spaces that you can see here show the connection between the entrance level and the living room, which I'm going to talk about now. The entrance is off the car park through a hall which opens up to the mezzanine floor. From here, we can view the sitting area and the general living spaces. Those spaces are accessible through the stairway. From the mezzanine, you can access the main sitting area, which we saw previously in the section. If we take a step farther back into the courtyard, the broader spatial connections are better understood, and the main entrance is in the top left. During the day, internal visual relationships fade, and instead we feel connected to the courtyard and its reflection on the different surfaces. The narrow corridor that you see here is a gallery of the client's private carpet collection. This corridor is a traditional Persian design archetype, acting as a transition between private and shared spaces. This is part of that corridor which opens up to the terrace, which is a multifunctional space area. It continues onward to private bedrooms from the hallway. These quarters that I was just talking about are located above Milad's personal rooms, the client's personal rooms. Their connection to the terrace and the courtyard can be understood from here. Finally, the placement of the guest rooms are significant to the living experience. The spatial relationship highlights this concept of an architecture that is discovered through an introverted connection from within itself and towards itself. In Persian architecture, allowing a guest to see us and be privy to the internal workings of our lives is the utmost symbol of intimacy and reverence. It is a sign of hospitality and inclusion. In line with this premise, the architecture distances itself from the officiousness of urban living, and we hope it draws in the whimsy of the rural environment. The project is a wall that is thickened and inhabited. It's not a top-down design, but rather grows from interactions with the context and in response to the field pattern of gardens which generates it. It's a project that provides a solution for rural development and separates itself from the negative impact of the inconsiderate development that's happening around right now. Instead, it celebrates the identity of the environment and highlights the joy of connection with nature and with each other. I'd like to finish the presentation with a photo of the site under construction right now. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Well, thank you for presenting a really interesting project for a house. Mariana, would you like to start with questions on this one?
Sure. I love the concept, the whole idea of making the thickness inhabitable and paying respect to the cultural references you did. Now, I was wondering, design-wise, why did you choose such inclinations? Like, why is the room with a convex roof and or the living room with a concave? How did you make those choices? How did you base your decisions? How did you ground your decisions?
Sure, that's a really great question. Let me see if I can go back a few slides to touch on that one moment where we talked about this a lot more. So the idea that where this project developed from is vernacular architecture that exists traditionally in Iran. And vernacular architecture is very naive, it's very organic, it's very playful. There's not that many sharp lines that we can see. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to that slide that talks about this. Oh, you can see it now, before you couldn't.
Yes.
Here you can see an image of typical vernacular architecture in Iran. So you can kind of see that naivety, that flowiness that exists in the architecture, and that curvature, those curvilinear lines. We sort of use that as our framework for this project as well. And so we tried to translate that into all the spaces.
I understand it in a general manner, but why this curve on this space? You know, why these radios and why this connection between these and that ratios for each room, for each proportion of space? This is more, I understand the whole idea and I think it's beautiful. And then why particularly for each room did you choose to go either this way or that way?
Sure. Yeah, so part of the reason is just for formal integrity, so that we keep that language, that integrated language everywhere in the project. But actually part of it is a little bit structural. So slight arcs also respond better in compression. And because we're using this vernacular material, it also helps with that a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Anka, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, just taking off from the last point that you spoke about, is it like what kind of challenges are you going to face when you work with this Adobe? And you're absolutely right. I mean, we also are. I mean, we have a lot of this mud architecture, and most of the forms are usually generated from the manner in which they are constructed. So that's what drives the form actually. And in this case, you're kind of doing an adaptation of it. So what kind of challenges do you see when you work with the system, or already you've done some mock-ups, or like how are you going about it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There is actually a lot of problems in this. I think that two of the aspects that we're still learning about, one is that traditional Adobe is not used so much anymore, and we're very proud to be able to bring this language back into design, especially in this rural area where we're kind of trying to celebrate the vernacular aspects and what traditionally was used as a material. But you're exactly right, because now we have a more contemporary design, and there's a lot of challenges to kind of adapt these two together. So to respond to that, I do have to say that we are using a more contemporary structural system below, and the Adobe is actually going to be used as a finish in the project to kind of cover everything afterwards. So we're sort of stepping away from the challenges that would exist structurally of using Adobe in the house, although we will be using it structurally for the walls. And then for the rest of the house, we would use it as a finishing on the outside of the project.
Right.
Peter.
Yes, it's interesting that one is anticipating your answer to that question, because you look at it and you know that it can't be structurally. I mean, I don't know much about Adobe, but it's a slurpy, muddy, you know. You can imagine that you'd need some concrete under there somewhere. Your work, in fact, that's what you have. So then it becomes an interesting issue, which is that you are aware of the tradition, and you continue extend that. And I love evacuated and inhabited walls. I love that idea. But then it also strikes one that when you look at it, it is still a modernist building. You know, a lot of the actual architecture comes straight from the modernist canon, and of course then inevitably, because it's been produced that way, so it raises the issue between actuality of production and what that thing is what clothes it is wishing to wear. So in fact, that's what it is. You know, it's a framed modernist building in structure. The question is that however much the brain and the intellect is wishing it to be of a certain tradition, when you make certain moves, it is another thing. And so I think the building is, you read that, you see that the modern construction and the wish for large areas of openness lead to a certain conclusion. It's probably one of those inevitable traps of architecture, you know. And at a certain point, then you say, okay, which way are you going? Or do you say, we're trying to go both ways, you know? It becomes like a sort of fat person wearing a tight suit, you know, or is it a thin person wearing a bulky suit? It's that kind of, sorry, not a bad analogy, but you know what I'm getting at. Mike, I'm sympathetic to you, because I love the idea of the inhabited wall, although actually it's a wall that bursts out into build a series of buildings. And it then also raised the question of the little external space. Do they have their own personality? I'm slightly missing a sort of third layer in the hierarchy. Somehow I feel slightly lacking further linguistic devices, which might, if you follow my thinking, a sort of bit more range of gambits to carry the thing through it. It's sort of two gambits. It needs another one. Sorry, it needs another gambit, in my view.
Peter, okay, I think that this was Peter who was talking. I'm sorry, I might have mixed up the names. You were breaking up a little bit for me. From what I understood, I'll try to respond a little bit. Oh no, it's the internet. What else can we do? But I think you're absolutely right. It is possible that we were trying to resolve a lot of things at the same time. I think that rather than because you used an interesting analogy, but I think that rather than putting a fat man in a tight suit or vice versa, it's more like trying to bring the best of both worlds. So we do have this potential of new technologies in terms of like creating expansive spaces and structure, so we can have thinner walls, for example, but at the same time to still be able to have that gesture and nod to the past or to the traditional elements of the space. We were really trying to do that, and in terms of hierarchy, I think that the hierarchy is just a little bit understated. It's more something that we hope can be understood when you're actually in the space. You can see here in the photo like the double height living space that's really opening up into the courtyard, which is the heart of the project. So it's a little bit understated, but we did try to create a sense of hierarchy that helps for wayfinding at least. So I hope that that answers your comment as far as I understood it, because it was a little bit choppy for me.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but a very elegant project and nicely presented, so thank you very much. We're going to take another short break, and then we will come back for the next in our series, which is the winner of the experimental category of future projects. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone.